Profit motive versus the war motive. Non-intervention is better than isolation. The capitalist profit motive versus the government's war motive. Libertarians and conservatives often see government intervention in the marketplace and in the world stage as a threat to individual freedom. This is especially true when it comes to war. The capitalist profit motive and the government's motive for war are two very different things, and it's important to understand the difference. If I really wanted to be controversial, I would have called it the government's murder motive, but that is not entirely accurate. There are justified wars, especially if it takes place in self-defense. And human beings do cooperate in order to compete with each other. The benefit of a free market capitalist system is people form groups to sell goods to others. In every other system, people form groups to invade another group and steal their resources. In a capitalist system, people sell goods to others that they want. The quote, "If goods don't cross borders, armies will," comes to mind. Unfortunately, the quote is often misattributed to Frederick Bastiat. It would have been nice if he actually said that, but it still summarizes his views well. Capitalism has a 200-year history of reducing violence among the general population. Government has a record of exacerbating it. The capitalist profit motive is driven by individual entrepreneurs and corporations seeking to maximize their profits by creating and selling products and services that consumers want. This motive drives innovation, competition, and overall economic growth. If a company fails to provide what consumers want, it will fail and eventually be replaced by another company that better satisfies consumer demand. On the other hand, the government's motive for war is driven by a mix of political, economic, and military factors. It's often driven by the desire for power, control, and resources. Wars are often started by dictatorial governments so that the local population will pay less attention to the troubles within their own country. Wars are not subject to the same market forces that drive the economy. Most people do not get to vote on war the way we vote on what products succeed. What I mean by that is, in a free market, every purchase we make is a vote for that product. Most people do not want war. It is decided on by an elite few. The rest of us only suffer the consequences. As William Tecumseh Sherman once said, "I am tired and sick of war. Its glory is all moonshine. It is only those who have neither fired a shot nor heard the shrieks and groans of the wounded who cry aloud for blood, for vengeance, for desolation. War is hell." Instead, wars are initiated by politicians and bureaucrats who are not directly accountable to the people. The U.S. House of Representatives abdicated its responsibility in voting on war long ago. Now presidents decide to go to war as it suits them. In a capitalist society, the profit motive is a powerful force for good because it encourages individuals to work hard and innovate. When the profit motive is allowed to flourish, people are free to pursue their own goals and dreams, and the economy benefits as a result. In contrast, government-initiated wars can be incredibly destructive, both in terms of human lives and economic resources. Many people believe World War II saved us from the Great Depression. This could not be further from the truth. The broken window fallacy shows us that it would have been better to spend our nation's resources on butter, and less on government armaments. Free markets produce wealth, governments only destroy it. Government decision-making nearly always extends recessions and depressions. But I'll save a discussion on the business cycle for a later article. The difference between the capitalist profit motive and the government's motive for war is a fundamental one. While the profit motive encourages individuals to work hard and innovate, the government's motive for war can lead to destruction, chaos, and enslavement to a corrupt system. As libertarians and conservatives, we believe that a free market economy and limited government are the best ways to ensure peace and prosperity for all. Military versus free market innovation. Throughout history, many governments have leveraged war and military conflict as a means to drive technological innovation and economic growth. This is often referred to as war profiteering. The idea is that the government invests in new technologies and industries to support the war effort, leading to a surge in economic activity and technological advancements. For example, during World War II, the U.S. government invested heavily in the development of new technologies such as radar, jet engines, and computers. These investments not only helped the US win the war, but also laid the foundation for many of the technologies that drive the modern economy. However, it's important to note that most technologies are originally created in the private sector. Airplanes, automobiles, steam engines, computers, tractors, and rocketry were all invented in the private sector. Although the government certainly used these technologies for its own designs. Over the years the government has spent great swaths of money in advancing these technologies. Yet it is still ludicrous to believe that innovation would not have continued without the government getting involved. Dr. Robert Hutchings Goddard imagined traveling to the moon when he created the rocket. The government took the technology and used it for violence. NASA claims Goddard's funding is the result of government innovation, but less than 2% of his budget came from the Smithsonian. The other 98% came from private donors. Look it up. War also often comes at a high cost in blood and treasure, a common phrase in the 19th century. Let's bring it back. Governments may use war as a pretext to justify large expenditures on military equipment and technology, but this can be a burden on taxpayers, and the private sector can do it better. Additionally, the majority of innovation is still created in the private sector even when the government is funding it. E.g. DARPA did not create the Internet, but it did fund it. J.C.R. Licklider, author of Man-Computer Symbiosis, worked for DARPA for 2 years. While there he pushed funding out to universities and a company called Bolt Beranek and Newman. Then he left the government to work for them, probably for a nice paycheck. This company would create the technology that allowed computers to connect for the first time. You may know the company today as Raytheon. While war profiteering has led to government innovation throughout history, it is not without its drawbacks. I believe that government spending should be limited and focused on protecting individual freedoms, rather than driving economic growth through military conflict. Private sector versus the war racket. The government often uses the innovations and resources of the private sector to further its war efforts. War is a racket. It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. Smedley Butler. In this system, the government contracts with private companies to produce weapons, supplies, and other resources needed for military operations. These companies then profit from the government's war efforts, leading to a cycle of government-supported war and private sector profiteering. One example of this can be found in the writings of Major General Smedley Butler, a U.S. Marine who was highly critical of the relationship between the government and private corporations in the military-industrial complex. In his short book War is a Racket, Butler argues that the government uses the private sector to further its war efforts, leading to profits for corporations at the expense of taxpayers and soldiers. According to Butler, the war racket is perpetuated by a small group of individuals and corporations who profit from war and militarism. This group includes weapons manufacturers, military contractors, and financial institutions that fund the government's war efforts. The government often relies on the private sector to provide the resources and technology needed for military operations, but this also creates a situation where corporations are motivated to profit from war and militarism. This, in turn, can lead to government policies that support military interventions, even when they may not be in the best interests of the public or the nation as a whole.